creeps. Andy here. Today I have my, what month is it? April reading wrap up for you. I have read 8 books again this month. Well, I've read 7 and 1 was an audiobook. Here are the books that I read this month. Please let me know what you read below and what your favorite, least favorite book was, all that kind of stuff. But let's get started. The first book that I read this month was Salem's Lot by Stephen King, and this was the first time I've ever read Salem's Lot, and so I wanted to pick it up and give it a read. It's basically a vampire story, but to be honest, there's not an overwhelming amount of vampires in it. Like, the vampires are pretty minimal and towards the end. It's about 650 pages, so it's a pretty long book. But I will say that the writing is really impressive here. His storytelling and character development and the kind of like the history of the town. It's really impressive that he can write about so many characters and keep them straight for the audience so you don't feel confused or have to flip back and see who's who. As far as the vampires go, I feel like it's nothing new. You know, it's kind of what we've heard of vampires up until this point. I would say I understand why it's a classic book that people enjoy, and I really did enjoy reading it, but I wouldn't recommend it to everyone. It definitely is, I would say, like a slower paced Stephen King novel, and it's much more surrounded around that character development like I was talking about than the actual story of the vampires. So keep that in mind if you haven't read this one. But I really enjoyed it. It had been, I think, a while since I've read a Stephen King book, if I'm not mistaken, and this kind of kickstarted my love for Stephen King again. I had been kind of staying away from his books because I've read a lot of his books in the past and I've been trying to, read new authors. But now that I'm reading 7 to 10 books a month, I feel like I can slip a Stephen King in every once in a while. And yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I thought that it was a fun story. I thought that it was extremely well written. I understand why it's a classic. But just no, not a crazy amount of vampire stuff. But there are some like fun, gory scenes and stuff like that. You know, it's Stephen King. But that's how I feel about that one. Let me know if you guys like Salem's Lot though, because I feel like it was mixed reviews when I bought it when I showed it in my book haul. So I'm just curious what you guys think about it. So the next one that I read was Tess Garretsons Harvest. And this, of course, is the author of the book, The Surgeon, that I've been obsessed with this year. And so I decided to buy the first book she ever wrote, and that is this guy. And I gotta tell you, it's not like The Surgeon in that, how can I put this? Okay, so The Surgeon is very character driven, and so you get to know the characters. Whether you love them or hate them is up to the reader, but you get to know each of them and kind of like see what makes them tick, sort of thing. This one's a little bit more, you don't know what side anyone's on, so the characters are obviously intentionally left vague, but it didn't satisfy me as much as a book like The Surgeon. I think because the characters were just way more well-rounded in that book. What I will say is this is a story about a doctor who finds that her patient, the heart, the donor heart is being taken from her patient who's like about to die, and they go on this, wild goose chase to figure out where this other recipient came from and how they've moved up on the donor list, even if they were even on the donor list, where these hearts are coming from. Turns out they're getting them illegally. And I gotta be honest, it's such an important concept to speak about, especially in America, especially relating to healthcare, because it shouldn't be a profitable industry. You know what I mean? Like, it shouldn't be a business, and it is here. And it's freaking disturbing reading a book like this and just thinking, this probably happens. It's actually terrifying. Like, you can just get away with anything if you have money. And it isn't until this doctor steps in and says, like, I think this is pretty messed up, that things start to change. But she puts her life at risk and her career at risk, and then she starts to find out that, other people may be in on it. And it's just a really messed up story about how if you're poor and you are in this country, you're not going to get the best healthcare, and if you're rich, you can get anything you want. I think it's a really important topic to discuss, and I did really enjoy this story, but I will say I still did like The Surgeon more. And I also feel like this one, because it's her first book, it's just not as well written as The Surgeon was. I still think it's an important book to read. I still think it's great. I still think a lot of people will like it, but I would recommend The Surgeon over this one. But also, like, read this at some point if you can, because I think it's an important subject to discuss. The next one that I read was Darcy Coates' The Fullcraft Ghosts, and I gotta be honest, this was not my favorite Darcy Coates book. This one seemed very, compared to her usual books, very minimal in the plot department. So usually her books are pretty go, 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 and there's usually a lot going on, and there's a character that needs to kind of figure things out. And this one seemed a little less entertaining, I'll say. And then this is also one of those books where you're reading it and you get to the end and then you go, oh cool, there's stories in the back, even though it just says The Fullcraft Ghost, and you guys know that irritates the living crap out of me. So if it said The Fullcraft Ghost and other stories, I would be less irritated, but I just hate when it doesn't. I mean, it says it on the back, but I try, like I said before, not to read a whole bunch of information on Darcy Coates books because I just go into them blind because I know that I'm going to enjoy them no matter what. This one, I'll say, it wasn't my favorite Darcy Coates book. It's about a sibling, a brother and a sister who go and live with their grandma after their mother gets in a really bad car accident. They're grandparents. And they've never met their grandparents before, and so they start kind of digging a little deeper and figuring out what is there. But I feel like it's maybe an earlier story that she wrote, and it just, to me, wasn't as well developed as some of her later stories. Still entertaining, not my least favorite Darcy Coates book either. Okay, next up, I read, is it Ira or Ira Levin? This Perfect Day. This is a dystopian science fiction novel about the people in the book are all part of the family, and they're given treatments each month, honestly kind of to zombify them and to take away their emotions, so they're not happy, but they're not sad or upset either. They're just kind of like okay with everything, and everything is kind of decided for them. Their algorithm decides if they can get married, if they can have children, what career path they'll have, if they have to move locations. You don't have free will, essentially. And it's about this group of people that contact Chip, who's like the main character here, and he basically meets up with this group and they explain to him how he can stop receiving his treatments so that his mind can become more free and he can think more freely for himself. And so it's like a whole mission of Chip, and it's a comment on a lot of things, honestly, on how far you're willing to push things, on being complacent in where you are. It's a comment on society and a comment on, obviously, you know, dystopian futures and technology and free will, and it's a lot. And so I think it really is up to the interpretation for the reader what they get out of it. But I really liked it. It's a really interesting, I feel like, twist on your typical dystopian story. It felt like a story I've read a million times and then a story I've never read before. It was kind of a mixture of everything all in one. I really enjoyed this. I really, really did enjoy it. But I will say that I think it's well written, I think it's entertaining, and I think that there's a lot of interesting things that you can analyze from reading this story. Their society isn't necessarily bad. I mean, everyone's happy, nobody's ill, they can, you know, they have jobs and homes and a place to stay and food and water, and so they have all of their basic needs met. And then they talk about the before times of like war and violence, and like fighting is a crazy concept for them because they would never dream of doing that. And so you kind of are like, oh yeah, is free will better? You know, and you kind of go back and forth through the story. It is a really interesting book to read, and I really, really enjoyed this. So let me know if you guys have read this or if you will pick it up. But yeah, I highly recommend. I really did enjoy that if you're into like science fiction dystopian stuff. I didn't really tell you what the plot of Salem's Lot was. It's basically this man, what's his name? Ben, I think. It's about this man named Ben who's writing a book on this old mansion that he remembered visiting as a kid that gave him nightmares. And so he goes back to the town, Salem's Lot, Jerusalem's Lot, and he begins writing the story and then slowly discovers that something's kind of off in the town. And then so he works with people in the town to try to put the vampires to rest. But anyway, sorry, I just realized I didn't really talk about that one. The next book was obviously another Tess Garretson book, Garretson book. This one is The Apprentice, and this is the second one to The Surgeon. And I gotta be honest, I really like these books. I showed you that I bought a third one in the book haul, and I'm so excited to read that one this month. I also told you that in The Surgeon, I wasn't really a big fan of Rizzoli's character. She kind of irritated me. And in this one, I feel like she's less annoying. I feel like you'll have to go back and see my explanation for it, but I feel like her past is described a little bit more. We get a little bit more into like her personal life and her family life and why she feels the way that she feels. And I feel like, you know, uncovering that about her makes her less irritating altogether. Plus her interaction with the surgeon has definitely calmed her down a little bit, and she is definitely more, she's still guarded, but she's less annoying. That's the only way I can put it. But anyways, this is about another killer who starts murdering people, and he ends up killing he abducts couples and kills the wife and like brutalizes the wife in front of the husband. Well, he ends up killing them both, but and so they're trying to find him, but he also has, it seems like, some maybe taking notes from the surgeon who was the killer in the first book, and then the story continues from there. So I'm really loving these books. I think that they're awesome. I still prefer the surgeon over this one, but I still enjoyed the heck out of this one too. So if you've read The Surgeon or haven't picked up the series, I honestly highly recommend them. I think they're fantastic. All right, the next book that I read was Stephen King's Elevation. I'm a little confused by this because this won a horror award, and like, how the heck is this a horror book? I was pretty confused reading it. It's so cute and such a cute story. I really enjoyed this book. Do not get me wrong. Is it horror? I do not personally think so. Very confused about that, but if you guys, if you have any input on that, let me know. But it's basically about a man who continues to lose weight but doesn't lose mass. So he looks like he's staying physically the same size, but he's becoming lighter and lighter, and so he's worried what will happen when his weight approaches, you know, nothing. He has new neighbors that moved in. They're a lesbian couple and they're having a rough time in town. People are not accepting of them. He tries to befriend them, and that's kind of the story. I mean, that's really all there is to it. It's just a short little novella, but I think it's really sweet and cute and worth a read, and kind of, you know, pulls on your heartstrings, and I don't know, I really enjoyed this one. So let me know if you guys have read that. And then the last book that I read, and then we'll get into the audiobook that I listened to. This is Isaac Asimov's The Caves of Steel. So this is it's from the Robot series, but it's a little confusing, but this is the first book in the series, and then there's like a point 1, a point 2, a point 3 that come before this, that were written before this, but this is the first one. It's weird, but from what I gather, you can read them all in any order. I always leave my little tags in here. Like, you can read this one first, or the the book that iRobot was based off of first, and it shouldn't make too much of a difference. And this is technically the first full-length novel. The other one was kind of like The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury, where it was a collection of short stories that was made into a novel later on. This one's kind of silly. Okay, so it's cool. I have read Isaac Asimov books in the past and really did enjoy them. This one, and it's really interesting. This book, I think, is from the 50s, like 54 or something. And it is really interesting to see what people back then thought was futuristic. Like, it's so funny. They're smoking pipes, and their futuristic idea of smoking is having a little vacuum at your desk to put the pipe stuff in. It's just so funny, you know, like he couldn't even comprehend the concept of like vape pens that we have now. I don't know. It's really interesting to read for that reason, and world building and things like that. It's about a man, so there are spacers, people from outer space that have conjugated on Earth, and then the Earth's population, and they hate each other. Spacers are scared of people from Earth because they don't have the immune systems that we have to fight illnesses. They don't have illnesses on their planet. And then people from Earth hate spacers because they're much more advanced of a civilization, and Earth seems to be kind of like the bottom of the barrel when it comes to the interplanetary planets and intelligence levels of outer space. You get what I'm saying. So there's a lot of resentment towards them. And then on top of that, there are robots that are being introduced to kind of take over people's jobs. So anyways, a spacer is murdered, and they're trying to keep it under wraps to try to figure out who the killer is. So a detective is hired to figure it out. That is our detective. I already forget his name. Oh, Elijah. That is our detective, and he is told that he has to have a spacer as a partner, but it turns out that his spacer partner is actually a robot, but it looks much more human because it's from the spacer people and not from the Earth people. Okay, all this to say, it's kind of silly. Pretty much the whole book, Elijah is like a terrible detective, and he just keeps going, "You're the killer," with no proof, just pointing people out. And then they're like, "No, I'm not." And he's like, "Oh, okay." And then, you know, a few pages later, he's like, "Wait, you're the killer." And then they're like, "No, Elijah, he's not the killer." And then he's like, "Oh, okay." And then at the end, he's being framed, and he's like, "I know why I'm being framed. It's because I'm getting so close to cracking this." And I'm like, "Elijah, bro, come here." You're not good at this. You are nowhere near solving it. He ends up solving it at the end, but it's kind of just like written in a silly way, I feel like. I still did enjoy it, but not as much as the other Isaac Asimov books that I've read. And I also do kind of wish that I read the first iRobot before this one, because I feel like I would have gotten a better understanding of the world, and like some things I felt like I was a little bit not confused about, but just weren't as clear as maybe they probably would be had I read that book first. But I don't know. Let me know if you guys have read this one. It was still interesting to read about, but yeah, I don't know. Let me know. And then the last book that I read, well, listened to, was an audiobook. And I have been listening to audiobooks because I accidentally signed up for Audible with my husband's card. And so we have a ton of credits, and neither of us knew that we were paying for it. Whoops, my bad. So anyways, I've been listening to an audiobook when I walk the dogs. And so I've been listening to like 1-2 a month. And this month I listened to What Lies in the Woods by Kate Alice Marshall. It's about a young girl who's attacked and stabbed as a young girl and left in the woods. That the stabbing isn't what's funny. My stupidity is what's funny. She was left in the woods, found, and, you know, barely survived. And there is a serial killer who was caught for the crimes. He went to jail for it. And he ends up passing away, and she ends up returning home to kind of speak with the other girls, because there were 3 girls in the woods, and even though the first one's the one that got attacked, these 2 witnessed what happened, and so, you know, they're all kind of messed up from that experience. She goes back into town so the 3 of them can meet up and kind of just discuss the death of the killer and their past and things like that. I did enjoy this story. I did like it a lot, but even from my explanation, I feel like you're probably like, that sounds like a familiar thing that happened. So I think that there's no way that this isn't based on true events, at least. And it doesn't say that anywhere that it is, but like, it seems like it was based on true events. So I don't know, it's kind of hard with stories like this. It doesn't say that it's from this specific event, and this could just be my interpretation of the story. It kind of just like made me feel a little off reading it. But I did really enjoy this story, and I enjoyed the writing, and this was one of the better audiobooks that I've listened to this year. I don't know, but the story did pull at your heartstrings a little bit. Like, there are some sad things that happen, and it is an interesting read. I'm not saying that the author did anything wrong. I'm just saying that me as a reader reading it, because I knew the other story, made me feel a certain way. That's all I'm trying to say. Otherwise, I thought it was a good read, and I think I'll pick up more of this author's books. I'm not sure if this is their first book or if they have other ones or what, but I am interested in reading a little bit more of their work. Yeah, let me know what books that you guys read this month. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon with another horror video. Bye, guys!